My husband Richard thought I was a confused old woman who would accept anything. So he brought his 30-year-old mistress to my 70th birthday party and introduced her as his business partner. But I was planning something that would make him realize the most expensive mistake of his entire life. This is how I made a man who thought he could humiliate me in front of my children and grandchildren regret the day he ever underestimated the woman who built his empire with her bare hands. If you want to see this revenge until the very end, subscribe now, because you're going to want to celebrate with me when I show you how I turned his midlife crisis into a life-ending catastrophe. I met Richard when I was 19, and he was 21. I was working as a secretary at his father's construction company, and he was learning the business from the ground up. We got married 6 months later, and I thought I was the luckiest girl in the world. I had no idea I was signing up to be an unpaid employee for the next 50 years. While Richard learned to run heavy machinery, I learned to run everything else. I kept the books, answered the phones, scheduled the crews, and dealt with the customers who called screaming about delays. When we had our first son, Tommy, I brought him to the construction trailer in a basket and worked with him sleeping under my desk. When our daughter Sarah came along 2 years later, I had 2 babies in that trailer while balancing ledgers and answering angry phone calls. Richard always said we were a team. He'd come home covered in sawdust and concrete, and I'd have dinner ready, the kids bathed, and the day's receipts organized on the kitchen table. He'd kiss my forehead and say, "What would I do without you, Dorothy?" I believed him. I believed we were building something together. When the company started growing, when we could afford to hire an actual bookkeeper, Richard said I deserved to stay home and focus on the kids. I thought it was a gift. I had no idea it was the beginning of my invisibility. I spent the next 30 years making Richard successful. When clients came for dinner, I cooked 3-course meals and made small talk that led to million-dollar contracts. When Richard needed to schmooze city council members, I organized charity events that made us look like pillars of the community. When he decided to run for city council himself, I planned his entire campaign while raising our kids and managing our household. I was the woman behind the man, and I was proud of it. I thought love meant making yourself smaller so your husband could be bigger. I had no idea I was erasing myself one day at a time. The construction company became Richard Sullivan Construction, then Sullivan Development, then Sullivan Properties. We owned half the commercial real estate in town. We had the big house on Maple Street, the lake house, the boat, the cars. Richard served 2 terms on city council and was talking about running for mayor. Everyone called us the power couple of Millbrook. At charity galas, people would say, "Behind every great man is a great woman," and I'd smile and blush like it was a compliment. I didn't realize they were telling me I was invisible, but I wasn't invisible to everyone. Mrs. Chen, who cleaned our office building, always asked about my kids. Frank Martinez, who ran the hardware store, always saved me the best deals because he said I had good sense about quality. Even Pastor Williams would ask my opinion about church finances because he said I had a head for numbers. These people saw me, even when my own husband started looking right through me. The first sign should have been the new assistant. Richard hired Madison when she was 28, fresh out of college with a business degree and legs that went on for miles. He said the company needed young energy, fresh perspectives. He started working later, taking more business trips, getting calls at all hours that he'd answer in another room. When I asked questions, he'd sigh and say, "It's complicated, Dorothy. Business stuff. You wouldn't understand." The man who used to ask my opinion about every major decision was suddenly treating me like I was too stupid to understand his world. The second sign was the way he started talking about retirement. Not our retirement. His retirement. He'd say things like, "Maybe it's time for me to step back, enjoy life a little." When I'd ask about our plans, about traveling together or spending time with the grandkids, he'd get vague. "We'll figure it out," he'd say. But he never met my eyes when he said it. I started feeling like I was watching my own life from outside, like I was a ghost haunting my own marriage. The third sign was the papers. I found them by accident when I was looking for our insurance information. Madison's name was on everything new. The condo downtown, the boat, even some of the business accounts. When I confronted Richard, he had an explanation for everything. She was helping with estate planning. The properties were investments. The accounts were for tax purposes. He made me feel crazy for asking questions, like I was some paranoid old woman who didn't understand modern business practices. But I wasn't paranoid, and I wasn't crazy. I was a woman who had spent 50 years building something with a man who was systematically stealing it from me. I just didn't know how systematically until my 70th birthday party. I had planned that party for months. I rented the community center, hired caterers, invited everyone we knew. Our kids flew in from across the country with their families. I wore the emerald green dress Richard had bought me for our 40th anniversary, did my hair at the salon, felt beautiful for the first time in years. I thought it was going to be a celebration of my life, of what we'd built together. I had no idea it was going to be the day my husband declared war on our marriage in front of everyone who mattered to me. Richard walked in late as usual, but he wasn't alone. Madison was with him, wearing a red dress that cost more than most people's rent and jewelry that sparkled under the community center's fluorescent lights. She wasn't dressed like an employee coming to her boss's wife's birthday party. She was dressed like she belonged there, like she had every right to be on his arm at a family celebration. "Everyone," Richard announced, clinking his fork against his wineglass. "I want you to meet Madison Palmer, my business partner. She's been instrumental in our recent success. Business partner, not assistant, not employee. Partner." I felt something cold settle in my stomach as I watched our friends and family shake her hand, as I watched my own children smile politely and ask her about her work. I felt like I was disappearing in real time. But the worst part wasn't the introduction. The worst part was how comfortable they were together, how she laughed at his jokes with genuine delight, how he touched the small of her back when guiding her through the crowd, how she called him Rick, a nickname I'd never heard anyone use, a nickname that suggested intimacy, inside jokes, a private world I'd never been invited to enter. I was watching my husband with a woman who clearly knew him in ways I no longer did. I spent my 70th birthday party watching my marriage die in public. I watched Madison charm my sister, compliment my daughter-in-law's earrings, play peekaboo with my youngest grandson. I watched Richard light up around her in a way he hadn't lit up around me in years. I watched everyone pretend this was normal, that it made perfect sense for a 70-year-old man to bring his 30-year-old business partner to his wife's birthday celebration. I felt like I was standing outside in the cold, watching my own life through a window I could no longer reach. Me conta nos comentários se você também ficou com raiva. Eu preciso saber que não sou só eu que acho isso absurdo. That night, after everyone went home, after Madison drove away in her brand-new BMW that I was sure we'd paid for, Richard acted like nothing had happened. He helped me load the dishwasher, commented on how nice the party had been, asked if I'd had a good time. When I finally found the courage to ask about Madison, about why he'd brought her, about what exactly their business partnership entailed, he looked at me like I was being ridiculous. "She's an important part of the company now, Dorothy," he said in that patient voice people use with children and confused elderly people. I thought it would be good for her to meet the family, understand the personal side of the business. Besides, she doesn't have much family of her own. I thought you'd appreciate me being kind to a young woman who's contributed so much to our success. Our success! As if I hadn't contributed anything. As if 50 years of my life meant nothing compared to whatever Madison Palmer had done in the past 2 years. That's when I realized Richard wasn't just having an affair. He was replacing me, systematically and deliberately, with a younger, prettier, more relevant version. And he was doing it so slowly, so carefully, that I was supposed to thank him for his kindness while he erased me from my own life. But I wasn't confused, and I wasn't finished. I was a woman who had built an empire from nothing, who had turned a small construction company into a multi-million-dollar development firm, who had raised successful children and maintained a marriage for 5 decades. I was Dorothy Sullivan, and I was about to remind everyone exactly who the hell that meant. The next morning, I called Jenny Rodriguez, the best divorce attorney in 3 counties. Jenny was the daughter of one of Richard's former employees, a girl I'd watched grow up who had gone to law school and built a reputation for destroying unfaithful husbands. She specialized in what she called gray divorces, marriages that fell apart when men decided their wives' expiration dates had passed. She was exactly what I needed. "Mrs. Sullivan," Jenny said when I walked into her office, "I've been wondering when you'd call. Half the town's been talking about your birthday party." That's when I realized everyone had seen what I'd been too trusting to recognize. Everyone knew Richard was making a fool of me except me. But that was about to change. Jenny spent 3 hours going through my life with a fine-tooth comb. Every property, every account, every investment, every business decision that had been made in the past 5 years. What we discovered was worse than I'd imagined. Richard hadn't just been having an affair with Madison. He'd been systematically transferring assets into her name, setting up shell companies with her as the primary owner, and preparing to divorce me with as little financial obligation as possible. "He's been planning this for at least 2 years, Jenny told me, spreading out documents across her conference table. "Look at this pattern. Properties being sold to shell companies she controls. Business accounts being transferred for restructuring. Even some of your personal assets have been moved around. He's been preparing to leave you with almost nothing. The man I'd spent 50 years loving, the man I'd sacrificed my own dreams to support, the man I'd trusted with everything I was and everything I owned, had been plotting to throw me away like garbage for 2 years. While I'd been planning anniversary dinners and birthday parties, while I'd been bragging about our grandchildren and organizing charity events, while I'd been living in what I thought was a happy marriage, Richard had been preparing to destroy me. But here's what Richard didn't know about me. I might have been invisible in my own marriage, but I was far from helpless. I had spent 50 years managing his business, understanding his finances, knowing where every dollar came from and where every dollar went. I knew which clients owed us money, which city council members owed us favors, and which investments were solid versus which ones were Richard's ego projects. I knew exactly how much we were worth, exactly how it had been built, and exactly what my contribution had been to every penny of it. Jenny and I spent the next month building a case that would make legal history in our county. We documented my contributions to the business, not just the early years when I'd officially worked there, but the decades of unpaid labor that had built Richard's reputation and client base. We traced every asset that had been hidden, every transfer that had been made without my knowledge, every shell company that had been created to cheat me out of what was rightfully mine. But the most beautiful part of our strategy wasn't just financial. Jenny had connections with every major newspaper in the state, relationships with journalists who specialized in exposing powerful men who abused their wives. She also had contacts in the business community who could make Richard's professional life very uncomfortable once word got out about his business practices. "Men like your husband," Jenny told me, "think they can have their cake and eat it too. They want to keep their respectable image while acting like entitled teenagers. We're going to make him choose. He can have his young girlfriend, or he can have his reputation and his money, but he can't have both." The divorce papers were served to Richard at the office, in front of Madison and 3 major clients. Jenny had timed it perfectly, right before a city council meeting where Richard was supposed to present a major development proposal. The papers detailed every hidden asset, every fraudulent transfer, and every attempt to defraud me of my marital property. They also included a cease and desist order preventing him from making any further financial moves without court approval. But that was just the beginning. Jenny had also prepared a press release detailing Richard's creative financial planning and his attempts to hide marital assets. By dinner time, every major news outlet in the state was running stories about the prominent businessman who had tried to cheat his wife of 50 years out of her fair share of the empire she'd helped him build. Richard called me that night, screaming about lawyers and reporters and how I was ruining his reputation. "How could you do this to me, Dorothy?" he kept asking, like I was the one who had betrayed our marriage. "How could you air our dirty laundry in public like this? The same way you could bring your girlfriend to my birthday party," I told him. "The same way you could steal from me for 2 years. The same way you could plan to throw me away after I gave you my entire life. You taught me that public humiliation was acceptable, Richard. I'm just a very good student." That's when Richard tried to negotiate. He offered me the house, half the savings, a comfortable settlement that would let me maintain my lifestyle. He acted like he was being generous, like he was doing me a favor by giving me scraps from the empire I'd helped him build. He had no idea I was holding cards he didn't even know existed. "Richard," I said, "you seem to be confused about something. This isn't a negotiation. This is a reckoning." The court hearing was devastating for Richard. Jenny had subpoenaed 2 years of financial records, and she presented them like a prosecutor presenting evidence of a crime. Every hidden asset, every fraudulent transfer, every attempt to steal marital property was laid out in excruciating detail. The judge looked at Richard like he was something stuck to the bottom of her shoe. "Mr. Sullivan," Judge Patricia Hendricks said, "in 30 years on this bench, I have rarely seen such a systematic and deliberate attempt to defraud a spouse. This court finds that Mrs. Sullivan is entitled to full compensation for all marital assets, including those that were fraudulently transferred, plus damages for the intentional infliction of emotional distress. Richard lost everything. Not half of everything. Everything." The court ruled that since he had systematically tried to hide assets that belonged to both of us, I was entitled to recover all of them, plus damages for his fraud. The house, the lake house, the business, the rental properties, the investments, everything went to me. Richard was left with his clothes, his car, and the crushing debt from legal fees. But the financial devastation was nothing compared to the social destruction. The story of Richard Sullivan, respected businessman and city council member, trying to cheat his wife of 50 years out of her life's work had gone viral. His development proposal was rejected unanimously by the city council. His business relationships evaporated overnight. His country club membership was quietly revoked. His church asked him to step down from the board of trustees. Madison, it turned out, wasn't as committed to Richard when he didn't have money and power. She disappeared as quickly as she had appeared, leaving him with nothing but memories of what he'd thrown away for a fantasy. The last I heard, she'd moved to Atlanta and was working as a business consultant for another wealthy older man. Some women never learn. Richard ended up renting a studio apartment across town, working as a construction foreman for a company that used to be his competition. Every day he drove past the office building that used to bear his name, past the house where we'd raised our children, past the lake house where we'd celebrated 50 years of anniversaries. Every day he was reminded of what he'd lost when he decided I was disposable. But my revenge wasn't complete with Richard's destruction. I had learned something important about my own power, about my own worth, about my own capacity to rebuild and reimagine my life. I was 70 years old, but I wasn't finished. I was just getting started. I renamed the company Sullivan and Associates and brought in my daughter Sarah as a partner. She'd always had a head for business, but Richard had never taken her seriously because she was just an elementary school teacher. Together, we transformed the company into something even more successful than it had been under Richard's leadership. We specialized in affordable housing development and became the largest employer of women in the construction industry in our state. I also started the Dorothy Sullivan Foundation for Women's Financial Independence, providing legal assistance and financial education for women going through gray divorces. Within 2 years, we'd helped over 300 women recover assets their husbands had tried to hide and rebuild their lives after decades of marriage. Jenny Rodriguez became our legal director, and together we created a network of attorneys who specialized in protecting older women from financial abuse. The foundation's first major case was helping Margaret Chen, whose husband had tried to hide their restaurant's profits before divorcing her for his secretary. We recovered everything he'd stolen and helped Margaret expand her business into a chain of 5 restaurants. The second case was Patricia Martinez, whose husband had transferred their farm into his brother's name before filing for divorce. We got the farm back and helped Patricia develop it into a successful agritourism business. Every woman we helped was a reminder that I wasn't alone, that Richard's behavior wasn't unusual, that older women all over the country were being discarded by men who thought age made us disposable. But we were proving them wrong, one case at a time, one recovered asset at a time, one rebuilt life at a time. My grandchildren, who had been confused and hurt by their grandfather's behavior, became my biggest supporters. They spent summers working at the construction sites, learning that their grandmother wasn't just a sweet old lady who baked cookies, but a businesswoman who could run heavy machinery and read blueprints and negotiate million-dollar contracts. My grandson Jake, who was studying engineering, decided to join the company after graduation. My granddaughter Emma started a scholarship fund for young women pursuing careers in construction and development. The house on Maple Street became the headquarters for the foundation. The dining room where I'd hosted political fundraisers became a conference room where women planned their new lives. The kitchen where I'd cooked dinner for Richard every night for 50 years became a place where survivors shared their stories and strategies. The home that had once been a symbol of my invisibility became a symbol of my power. 3 years after my birthday party, I was featured on the cover of Forbes magazine as one of the most influential businesswomen in the Midwest. The article was titled, "Dorothy Sullivan, the woman who turned betrayal into an empire." I kept a copy framed in my office, not because I was proud of the recognition, but because it proved something important. I had always been powerful. I had always been valuable. I had always been enough. I had just been married to a man who convinced me otherwise. Richard tried to contact me several times over the years. He sent letters apologizing, asking if we could work things out, claiming he'd made a mistake and wanted to come home. Each letter went straight into the shredder. Some bridges once burned are meant to stay that way. Some betrayals are so fundamental that forgiveness isn't healing. It's just another form of self-destruction. The last time I saw Richard was at our grandson Jake's wedding. He looked older, smaller, like a man who had spent 5 years swimming upstream against the consequences of his own choices. He approached me during the reception, nervous and hesitant, like he was afraid I might cause a scene. "Dorothy," he said, "you look wonderful. Happy." "I am happy, Richard," I told him. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." "I know I don't have the right to ask," he said, "but do you think you could ever forgive me? Do you think we could ever?" "Richard," I interrupted, "forgiveness is something I give myself, not something I give to people who aren't sorry they hurt me. Just sorry they got caught. You're not sorry you betrayed me. You're sorry it didn't work out the way you planned." He started to argue, to explain, to make excuses, but I held up my hand. "I need you to understand something," I told him. "You didn't just cheat on me with Madison. You tried to steal my life's work. You tried to leave me with nothing after 50 years of marriage. You humiliated me in front of our family And friends. You treated me like I was disposable. That's not a mistake, Richard. That's a choice. And choices have consequences. I walked away and didn't look back. Some people are meant to be lessons, not lifelong partners. Richard taught me that I had been strong all along, that I had just been using my strength to hold up a man who was determined to tear me down. He taught me that love without respect is just manipulation with pretty words. He taught me that it's never too late to demand the life you deserve. Today I'm 75 years old, and busier than I've ever been. The foundation has helped over 1,000 women recover nearly $50 million in hidden assets. Sullivan and Associates has built affordable housing for 3,000 families and employs over 200 people, 60% of whom are women. I serve on the boards of 4 nonprofits and speak at conferences about women's financial empowerment and late-life entrepreneurship. But more importantly, I'm free. Free from the exhaustion of making myself smaller to make someone else feel bigger. Free from the confusion of being gaslit by someone who was supposed to protect me. Free from the fear that I'm not enough, not valuable, not worthy of respect and love. Free to be exactly who I was always meant to be. Sometimes people ask me if I regret the divorce, if I miss being married, if I wish things had worked out differently. The answer is always the same. I regret wasting 50 years on a man who didn't deserve 5 minutes of my time. I don't miss being married to someone who made me invisible. And I wouldn't change anything about how things worked out because my pain became my purpose. And my purpose has touched more lives than my marriage ever did. You see, silence isn't submission. It's strategy. And sometimes the quietest person in the room is planning the loudest comeback you've ever seen. Richard thought he was discarding a confused old woman who would accept whatever scraps he offered. Instead, he discovered that this confused old woman had built his entire world and could take it apart just as easily. Age isn't about becoming weak or irrelevant or disposable. Age is about accumulating power, wisdom, and the absolute refusal to accept less than you deserve. If this story gave you courage to never accept disrespect, subscribe and tell me in the comments who in your life needs to hear this story. I want to support you too, because we're never too old to demand better, and we're never too late to become exactly who we were always meant to be. And if someone thinks they can underestimate you because of your age, remind them that experience isn't just wisdom, it's power. And power in the right hands can move mountains, or in my case, move 50 years of accumulated wealth right out of a cheating husband's reach.